Hello, and welcome to this post-KubeCon, CloudNativeCon 2025 follow-up. I'm Rob Strechay, and today we're going to be talking about OpenSearch and what happened at KubeCon and CloudNativeCon back in Atlanta. Today, to help me do this, I'm really excited to be joined by Bianca Lewis, who's Executive Director, OpenSearch Software Foundation. Welcome on board, Bianca.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much, Rob. Look, it's super exciting to be on board. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was exciting to catch up with you at KubeCon. I think, you recently became the executive director for OpenSearch. How has the role and the experience in the first few months of this new journey been treating you?
It's a great question. It feels like it's spinning, right? I'm about 2.5 months into the role. However, I think it's true to say I've been involved with OpenSearch from the very first day of the project. We might get into that a little bit later on, but how's it treating me? So when I've come in to formally be the executive director of OpenSearch Software Foundation, it's been a year after it was donated to the Linux Foundation. So a lot of the credibility, the groundwork of vendor neutral sustainability and then those sort of metrics and parameters already well on its way when I joined. So when I joined already, there was a very vibrant community, growing community, new lease of life, I could say. In the fields of AI, search, the way that observability is changing and everything else. But when I come in, it's now changed from the last year from, I think, about 200 odd contributors. And by the way, there's an OpenSearch dashboard that we can cover this, but it's changed from about 200 contributors to over 3,000 contributors. It's gone to, I think, 1.4 billion project downloads today. The ecosystem now consists of almost 100 solution providers. So that the OpenSearch as a project, as a platform, has become really, really huge. So the first thing I found when I joined my first couple of months has been getting my head around just the power and size of this project, which is just undergoing this massive wave of innovation. And then it's about the next phase. It's about phase 2, after the credibility of something completely vendor neutral, to give some foundational steps to make it scalable, to give companies a place where they can freely contribute to the success of the project, grow the ecosystem around, and give a framework that OpenSearch can become really an open source suite where you can build multiple use cases driven truly by community without any vendor interest. And yeah, I've just been making those plans. I've been talking to many, many members of the community, many people at the Linux Foundation who've helped me a lot, as well as many people like yourself, Rob, who kind of give me pointers from different experiences. And it's about building phase 2.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think, again, as you look at it, you had a fantastic background. What do you think most prepared you for taking on the executive director in this open source world? And, as you came in, like you said, you've been around this project, but, kind of give the audience a little bit of your background that prepared you for this.
Yeah. So I think it's well known that anybody that does a LinkedIn search that I came from a commercial background. So definitely coming into the open source world dedicated in the Linux Foundation and OpenSearch Software Foundation is a new challenge for me on a personal level as well. Where I really love this challenge, though, is the fact that, to be restrictive in my answer, I started on search technologies way back in 2015 as the first sales manager to build the sales teams and the business team at a company called Logs.io. And that provided a front-end service for Elasticsearch as a service. So it was a SaaS company, but it was open source under Apache v2 at the time. And I got introduced to what an open source go-to-market model was and how that interfaces with the commercial vendor ecosystem and how companies can really have great foundation and commercial interest in using open source as sort of a business model to build their business on. So I really loved that. A few years later, I joined on the founding team of a company called Obster, which took it from use cases where we largely dealt with large observability clusters into more the application and mission critical search operations of Elasticsearch. And as we know what happened in 2021, when Elasticsearch license changed from Apache v2 into a more restrictive license, which was no longer open source. And that was the birth of OpenSearch. And suddenly our company, instead of supporting one platform, we now supported two platforms. So I always joke like overnight we doubled in size. However, a few years later, this company made an exit. It got bought by that same vendor that closed, or not closed, but made the license for Elasticsearch at the time more proprietary. And when the company got purchased, I faced a time where I had to reflect on what I really wanted, what I really believed in terms of the future of data platforms and technology. And I think at the end of the day, open source for me will always win, especially if you're dealing in the realms of foundational platforms within a business to build the applications on. I think that the fact that the community drives what they need, the fact the community have eyes on the project, and the pace of development can be so much more than any sort of proprietary approach that I've got nothing against. I spent most of my life there, but I found that the world of open source and my particular background of getting dedicated into open source has prepared me kind of perfectly for this challenge that we spoke about at the beginning.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, again, and a shout out to Asaf Yagal, a buddy of mine from the Logs. I know he's over at Logs still. And I think, again, when you look at it, we agree. I think open really wins when you start to look at it and how the models and organizations and the contribution, but it really takes community. And I think a big focus, while we were down in Atlanta, was the fact that, it was your first KubeCon and CloudNativeCon. When you look at the community and you look at being part of OpenSearch, Software Foundation at that event, how did you see that event going for you? How was it for you?
First of all, I loved this KubeCon. It's not my first KubeCon, but I found, and I don't know how you found it, Rob, but I found a great energy there this year. I think there were about 9,000 attendees. And what I think I really loved about it was, first of all, it was vendor neutral. And that, by definition, of course, gives a space for more vendors to have a voice of how they see the future of technology, because there's all the commercial vendors that generally come into the community of cloud native technologies and develop on that in order to innovate what our future is going to look like. So I think KubeCon this year was, in a way, better than any KubeCon North America I've been at previously, which is a great hats off to the Cloud Native and CNCF foundations. I had some really interesting conversations, and what I noticed, a lot of the interest at this year's KubeCon was around monitoring to observability and the change that this whole landscape is undergoing at the moment. I won't go into too many details at the moment, but it's super interesting to dig into that perhaps at another time. Lots of AI. every platform that you would see at KubeCon had loads of AI in it, which was not always easy to explain the differences or the use cases of each one. But I have to admit that a large part of my KubeCon this year was in meeting rooms, talking to very smart, wise people and just learning from everyone in the community how the open source technologies are really driving innovation at a pace that I've never seen before.
Yeah. No, I think, again, you had some great stuff going on. I mean, OpenSearch, the project got to version 3.3.2. You've also had some core engine enhancements. You were at ML Commons. There was Neural Search. There's KNN security plugins and way more. And like you said, celebrating the 1-year anniversary back in August, I think it was saying, and I think this talks to some of the momentum you've had, that 78% year over year increase in downloads. And you were saying just a phenomenal amount earlier. So did you come out of this with that, seeing the community even leaning in more as you came through this? Because I know you were in meeting rooms, trust me, I was sitting on a desk the entire time. So it was, yeah. But what we like to say is that when you get into the hallway and you're having these conversations as you walk through, did you see people, because like you said, I mean, OpenSearch and data platforms really are kind of the underpinning of AI, and AI was such a big discussion there. Was that a lot of the takeaways that you had coming out of there, or what were your big takeaways coming out of KubeCon this year?
I mean, it was it definitely was an eye-opener in a lot of ways. I think that one of the most exciting things that I've heard from all the meetings, if you talk about like conversational chats that you have with people that you meet in the hallways and also in the meeting rooms, is just how many different use cases people are using OpenSearch for today. As I spoke about my background, largely in observability and search, within that, the landscape has changed tremendously. Observability has become a lot closer to development, has become, instead of a cost center, driver for business decisions even. So the whole landscape's changed. And search, as you mentioned before, the search landscape has changed with the event of LLMs and AI and agentic search, etc. Great. But it didn't stop there. The conversations carried on at KubeCon, because people were using it more and more for their security monitoring. And they were using it more for building AI applications with OpenSearch as an AI native database. And I think the approach to be able to control your technology based on open source, on OpenSearch especially, control the cost and control the functionality, and having all of that innovation on all different use cases, which is, like we said, to recap, observability, search, AI applications, security, and you can use it on the same sort of a data retrieval layer of OpenSearch. It was an eye-opener just how people are using this technology.
Yeah, I agree. I think, again, when you start to look at how people are pushing in on the different technology and they're really focused on how they can leverage it. I mean, observability and, logs, metrics, and traces, and bringing the, the security stuff together with kind of the infrastructure stuff, and being able to make business decisions and have understanding of business outcomes has been, great there. So as we kind of roll into the end of here, what do you hope that you can say that you can't say today, but you want to say maybe in Amsterdam or next year in Salt Lake when we're together, about where OpenSearch has gotten to?
Yeah, that's great questions, because you put two landmarks like half a year and a year away.
Yeah. Well, it feels like Amsterdam is like literally around the corner. I'm like sitting there going, oh my God, I have to register already. I'm like, this is it's a little, I'm jumping the gun, but it's like 4 months away. It's not even 6.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like time flies when you're having fun. I think what's interesting about that question is that there's kind of two parallel answer tracks to the question. The one is, well, what is what am I going to say about the OpenSearch Software Foundation, and what are we going to be talking about the platform advancement and what that's going to look like in the world of OpenSearch? So definitely, if we're talking about on the OpenSearch software foundational level, as we mentioned earlier, we plan to go into our phase 2 here. And already we've got very exciting premium members that have signed up and who are innovating at a pace which is almost unbelievable. We got obviously AWS, and we've got IBM, which we announced just before KubeCon. We've got SAP, we've got Uber, and we're working very, very hard to innovate in all those different use cases with our partners. We're giving that framework, accreditation, growing the vendor ecosystem, giving more value to the community, which we won't get into details. So our plan in 6 months to make some really, really meaningful announcements on the way that companies can really join the OpenSearch community and gain the maximum benefit from working on that. Now, on the platform front, in the next 6 months, obviously we now have an 8-week release cycle, which is not by coincidence. It's driven by the community who sits on our TSC, our Technical Steering Committee, who make these decisions. So they thought that an 8-week one is a great pace of innovation. Of course, I agree with that. In 3.3, almost shaped what we're going to be talking about in 6 months' time, right? I think you mentioned it as well, where in 3.3, now the Discovery tab within OpenSearch has been released, where you can see your logs and your traces and your metrics all in a single interface. And what is great about that is it provides the context to the data in order to make quicker and better and more accurate decisions. Because of course, every log will belong to a trace and have associated metrics. It's not 3 different data sets like we treated them in the past. On the search front, of course, we've got other capabilities as well, which are super exciting. For the first time, we've got agentic AI as GA, and what that means is that it empowers the non-technical people who don't necessarily know how to formulate queries to ask of their data the answers to the questions that they need to base their business decisions on. Now they can write in plain English or in the language of choice, and they can say, listen, why did conversions in Berlin drop last week Tuesday? And OpenSearch will create the necessary queries, query the data, and bring back the answer. So it democratizes the way that people can actually use their data. And in Amsterdam, we're going to be way beyond 3.3. If we do the math, we should be at 3.5, 3.6 by then, and have a load of feedback and direction of how that is now starting to change the platform and the use of unified contextual AI-empowered data. When we get to OpenSearch North America 1 year away, I'm going to go more on the larger prediction front, which is a little bit counterintuitive as well. I think we've got so many different elements and so much innovation that is happening there that we're going to see a few trends by then, which I think will be more concrete. And maybe we can meet up after KubeCon to see how correct I was. The one thing which I think is going to happen is that as more things change, nothing will change.
Yep, I agree with that.
The pace of change is so exciting and moves so quickly that we're actually going to see that we're still using search and we're still using observability in much the same way. And the very foundational technologies that we've had are still underpinning all the innovations. I think I drew the analogy of the car did not make the wheel obsolete.
I like that. I like that, and yeah, we definitely will have to sit down again and see how good our predictions are. Funny enough, I think AI is still going to be a thing in a year, to put it mildly. So
Yeah.
I think we'll still be talking about this. Hey, Bianca, thanks for coming on board. This has been great, and we'll definitely do this again. I really appreciate you coming on board. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks, Rob. It's been a great chat.
And thank you for watching this post-KubeCon CloudNativeCon 2025 episode of theCUBE, the leader in tech analysis and news. Stay tuned.